As the soft glow of fairy lights illuminated the living room, I reached into the worn cardboard box labeled Christmas decorations and pulled out another fragile ornament. It was a tradition, our tradition, to decorate the tree together every year. This was supposed to be our night, filled with laughter, warm cocoa, and the soft hum of holiday tunes. But my heart clenched when I saw it. Nestled in my hand was a glass bauble, delicate and perfectly round, catching the twinkle of the lights. It was beautiful, but it wasn't its design that made me freeze. On its surface, in a looping script that seemed almost mocking in its elegance, were the words, "You're always in my heart, Lina." Lina. I'm not Lina. For a moment, the room fell silent. My ears buzzed as my mind raced. The name was foreign to me, yet it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Who was she? Why was her name etched into this token of love? And why was it here, among our decorations, hidden like a secret waiting to be uncovered? "Hey, what did you find?" His voice broke my trance. I turned to see him, my husband, standing by the fireplace, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. His smile was as easy as ever, the kind of smile that once made me feel like the luckiest woman alive. I should have said something, asked him outright, demanded an explanation. But instead I smiled back, tight-lipped, forced, and held up the ornament. "Just another one for the tree," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil. His attention shifted back to untangling a string of lights, and I hung the bauble deliberately on the front of the tree, at eye level, where no one could miss it. Asilent dare. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. My hands moved automatically, placing ornaments here and there. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. Questions swirled relentlessly. Was Lina someone from his past? A fleeting romance? Or something more? The name felt like a crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew about us. By the time the tree was complete, I was exhausted, not from the decorating, but from the weight of my thoughts. He kissed me goodnight, his touch as familiar as ever, and I let him. But as he drifted off to sleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with dread. New Year's Eve arrived like a slow crescendo, each passing hour amplifying my unease. Friends were coming over for the countdown, and the house was alive with chatter, music, and the clinking of glasses. But my eyes kept straying to the tree, to that damned ornament. He hadn't noticed it. Or, if he had, he hadn't reacted. Either way, it felt like a ticking bomb, its presence gnawing at me. Midnight crept closer, and with it my resolve. I'd decided. If he didn't acknowledge it, I would. I'd waited long enough. As the countdown began, 10, 9, 8, the room seemed to shrink. I could see him across the crowd, laughing with our friends, his face the picture of ease. I hated him in that moment for how effortlessly he seemed to carry on, as if nothing was amiss. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Cheers erupted, champagne glasses clinked, and the room filled with the kind of joy that felt cruelly out of reach. Couples kissed, toasts were made, and yet there I was, tethered to a glass ornament and the name I didn't recognize. Finally, as the revelry died down and the crowd thinned, he made his way over to me. "You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing slightly. "You've been quiet tonight." I took a deep breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. "I'm fine," I said, gesturing to the tree. "But I noticed something while we were decorating." His eyes followed my hand, landing on the ornament. For a moment nothing happened, and then his expression shifted. He went pale. It was subtle at first, a flicker of recognition, followed by a tightening of his jaw. His hand twitched at his side, as if resisting the urge to reach out and take it down. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. His face said it all. I crossed my arms, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Who's Lina?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Try me." He hesitated, and for a brief, terrible moment, I thought he might lie. But then he sighed, the weight of whatever he'd been carrying seeming to settle on his shoulders. "Lina was someone I loved. Before you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Before me? So why is her ornament on our tree? Why keep it at all?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the bauble, his gaze distant. "I thought I'd thrown it out," he said, almost to himself. I didn't even realize it was still here. That's not an answer, I said, my voice rising despite myself. Why is it here? Why is she still in your heart? It's not like that, he said quickly, his eyes pleading now. I loved her, yes, but she's gone. She died. Years ago. The room seemed to tilt. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Of all the possibilities I'd imagined, this wasn't one of them. I didn't tell you because, he paused, searching for the right words. Because it felt like betraying her memory. But I swear, she's not a part of my life anymore. You are. You're my present. My future. Tears blurred my vision, a mix of anger, hurt, and something I couldn't quite name. And yet she's here. On our tree. I'll take it down, he said quickly, reaching for the ornament. But I stopped him. No, I said firmly. Leave it. His hand hovered in the air before dropping to his side. He looked at me unsure, but I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The ornament would stay, not as a tribute to her, but as a reminder to me. A reminder that love is complicated, messy, and often burdened by the past. And as I looked at the tree, at the glass bauble that had turned my world upside down, I realized that the real question wasn't about Lina. It was about us. Could I accept his past and trust in our future? Or would this small, fragile ornament shatter everything we'd built? Only time would tell. The house was quiet after the guests left, their laughter and the echoes of celebration fading into the stillness of the early hours. The scent of champagne and pine lingered in the air, mingling with the faint smokiness of the extinguished candles. I stood in the living room, staring at the tree, at her ornament. It sparkled innocently among the others, as though it had every right to be there, and yet it felt like an intruder, a silent witness to a love story that didn't include me. He had gone to bed after our conversation, retreating under the guise of exhaustion. I hadn't stopped him. I didn't want to share the same space, not yet. My emotions were a storm I couldn't contain. The anger, the hurt, the confusion. It all roared inside me, demanding answers I wasn't sure he could give. I found myself pacing the room, each step heavier than the last. What was I supposed to do now? His words echoed in my mind, she's gone. She's not a part of my life anymore. But was that true? Could someone like Lina ever really be gone when she was still etched into his heart? Into a decoration that had somehow found its way onto our tree? My gaze landed on the box of decorations we hadn't finished unpacking. With trembling hands, I opened it, sifting through its contents. Memories spilled out. Our first Christmas together, marked by a tiny snow globe, a set of ceramic reindeer he'd insisted on buying, because they reminded him of his childhood. A star we'd bought the year we moved into this house. And there, buried beneath the tinsel, I found something else. A photograph. It was small and slightly bent at the corners, as though it had been handled many times. In it, he stood with a woman I didn't recognize. She had dark hair that fell in soft waves, a radiant smile that lit up her entire face, and eyes that seemed to hold a world of warmth. His arm was around her, his expression one of unfiltered joy. I didn't need to ask who she was. I already knew. Lina. The name felt heavier now, more real. This wasn't just a name on an ornament. This was a person, someone who had once been the center of his world. And though I wanted to throw the photo back into the box, to pretend I hadn't seen it, I couldn't. My fingers traced the edges of the image, and for the first time, I felt a pang of something unexpected, sympathy. I sat down on the couch, the photo still in my hands. Lina was beautiful, yes, but there was something else, a kind of presence that seemed to leap from the image. I could see why he'd loved her, and I could see why losing her would leave a mark that no amount of time could fully erase. But where did that leave me? I didn't realize how long I'd been sitting there, until the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains. My thoughts had spiraled endlessly, going over every possible scenario, every question I could ask him. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout, to cry, to make him understand how much this had hurt me. But beneath all of that was a deeper fear. What if I wasn't enough? What if in some quiet corner of his heart, he still loved her more than he could ever love me? When I finally made my way upstairs, the bedroom was dark. He was asleep, his breathing steady and peaceful. I stood in the doorway, watching him. The man I'd built a life with, the man I thought I knew inside and out. But now there was a part of him that felt like a stranger. A part of him that belonged to her. The next few days were a blur. We didn't talk about the ornament or Lina. I carried the weight of it silently, trying to piece together how I felt, what I wanted to do. He seemed cautious around me, as though he knew I was on the edge of saying something, but wasn't sure if he wanted to hear it. It wasn't until the weekend that the tension broke. We were sitting in the kitchen, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. He was flipping through the newspaper, sipping his coffee, when I finally spoke. "I found a photo," I said, my voice steady but quiet. He froze, his hand gripping the mug a little too tightly. Slowly, he set it down and looked at me. "A photo? Of you and Lina." He didn't deny it. Didn't try to deflect or make excuses. Instead, he nodded, his expression somber. "I wondered if you'd come across it." I leaned forward, my hands clasped together on the table. "Why didn't you tell me about her? About what happened?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because it's painful. And because it felt like bringing her up would somehow diminish what I have with you. I didn't want you to think you were competing with a ghost." "But I am, aren't I?" I said, my voice breaking. "She's still here, in your memories, in that ornament. I don't know how to compete with that." "You don't have to compete," he said firmly. "What I had with Lina, it was special, yes. But it's in the past. You're my present. You're the one I chose to build a life with. Then why does it feel like there's a part of you that still belongs to her?" He didn't have an answer for that. Or if he did, he couldn't find the words to say it. Instead, he reached across the table, taking my hands in his. His touch was warm, familiar. And for a moment it steadied me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For not telling you. For making you feel like you're not enough. You are. You always have been." The sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. But the doubt in my heart remained. Could I accept that he would always carry a piece of her with him? Could I live with the shadow of someone I would never truly know, but could never fully escape? As the days passed, I realized there was no easy answer. Love is messy, tangled with the past and shaped by the present. And while Lina would always be a part of his story, I had to decide if I could be the one to write the next chapters with him. The ornament stayed on the tree that year, and every year after. Not as a symbol of the pain it had caused, but as a reminder of the resilience it took to face it. Some wounds don't heal completely, but with time, they become part of the fabric of who we are, woven into the story of a love that endures. As the weeks turned into months, the memory of that night lingered, though its sharp edges began to dull. The ornament still hung in my mind, even when the tree had long been taken down, its pieces carefully packed away for another year. It sat like an unanswered question, a quiet presence that I couldn't shake. I would catch myself glancing at the storage closet sometimes, wondering if it was buried deep enough not to haunt me. Our lives returned to a semblance of normalcy, but there was an unspoken tension between us. He acted more attentive, as though trying to prove his devotion, and while I appreciated his efforts, I couldn't help but wonder if it came from guilt. Every time he touched me, every time he looked at me, I searched for signs of hesitation, for some hint that part of his mind was still with her. But he gave me nothing, no reason to doubt his words. The problem wasn't him, it was me. The doubts had taken root in my heart, and no matter how much I tried to ignore them, they grew. I would lie awake at night, replaying our conversation, wondering if I'd done the right thing by letting the ornament stay. It was a small thing, just glass and paint, but it carried so much weight. What was I trying to prove by keeping it there? That I was stronger than the memory of a woman I'd never met? Or was it just my way of testing him, seeing if he would falter under its silent reminder? One evening, months after New Year's, I found myself alone in the house. He was out of town for work, a last-minute trip that had left me with too much time and too many thoughts. The house was eerily quiet without him, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and groan. I wandered aimlessly, trying to distract myself, but my feet eventually took me to the storage closet. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, to pretend it didn't exist, but another part, the part that couldn't let go, needed to confront it. With a deep breath, I opened the door and pulled out the box marked Christmas decorations. My hands trembled as I peeled back the tape and sifted through the layers of tissue paper. There it was. The glass ornament was as beautiful as I remembered, its surface smooth and cool against my fingers. The words, "You're always in my heart, Lina," seemed almost cruel now. A message not meant for me, but for someone who had long since left this world. I turned it over in my hands, as if hoping to find some hidden clue, something that would make it all make sense. But it was just a bauble. And yet it wasn't. It represented a part of him that I could never touch. A love that existed before me, untainted by the years and struggles we had faced together. I hated it and envied it in equal measure. Before I realized what I was doing, I carried the ornament to the living room. The tree wasn't there anymore, but I placed it on the mantel, propping it up against a framed photo of the two of us. It looked out of place, like it didn't belong. And yet it seemed to demand attention, its presence impossible to ignore. That night I dreamed of her. I didn't know what she looked like beyond the photograph I'd found, but in my dream, she was vivid and real. She was laughing, her dark hair catching the sunlight, and he was there too, holding her hand. They looked happy, so much so that it hurt to watch. When she turned to me, her smile softened, and for a moment, it felt as though she was speaking directly to me. "Take care of him," she said, her voice a whisper carried on the wind. "He needs you." I woke with a start, my heart racing. The dream felt too real, too vivid to dismiss as a figment of my imagination. I sat up in bed, the image of her lingering in my mind. Was it guilt that conjured her? Or something else? I didn't believe in signs or messages from beyond, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she had left something unfinished, something I was now a part of. When he returned the next day, I didn't mention the dream or the ornament. I wasn't sure how to bring it up without sounding ridiculous. But as we sat together on the couch that evening, his arm around me, I felt a shift. The questions that had plagued me for months didn't feel as pressing anymore. The doubt, while still there, seemed smaller, more manageable. Over time, the ornament became less of a symbol of pain and more of a quiet reminder. It stayed on the mantel for a while, though I eventually packed it away with the other decorations when Christmas rolled around again. This time, when we hung it on the tree together, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an acknowledgement, not just of her, but of the past that had shaped him into the man I loved. Lina would always be a part of his story, just as he would always be a part of mine. And while I might never fully understand what they had together, I didn't need to. What mattered was what we had now. The life we were building together, one fragile piece at a time. Love isn't about erasing the past. It's about accepting it and choosing to move forward, even when it's messy and complicated. And so every year, the ornament finds its place on our tree, not as a shadow of what was, but as a testament to what is, and to the strength it takes to let love endure. As the years rolled on, the ornament became a fixture in our holiday tradition, an object that no longer stung but still carried a quiet significance. Each December, when we unpacked the decorations, I would see it nestled among the tinsel and garlands, and my heart would no longer twist in confusion or hurt. Instead, I would feel something softer, something closer to understanding. It wasn't just a bauble anymore. It was part of the story of us, imperfect and layered, but undeniably ours. That didn't mean it was always easy. Relationships are living things, constantly evolving and demanding care. I'd like to say that finding the ornament was the hardest thing we ever faced, but that wouldn't be true. Life has a way of throwing challenges at you that make past struggles seem smaller in hindsight. There were disagreements, moments of doubt, stretches of silence, when it felt like we were speaking entirely different languages. But through it all, we kept choosing each other. Again and again, in ways both big and small. One Christmas, several years after that first discovery, we had a new reason to celebrate. Our daughter, Emma, was old enough to help decorate the tree for the first time. At 3 years old, she was all boundless energy and uncontainable excitement, toddling from one box of ornaments to the next with wide eyes and sticky fingers. Every glittering bauble was a treasure to her, every strand of lights a magical discovery. Her laughter filled the room, a melody that made everything else fade into the background. As we worked, she picked up the glass ornament with Lina's name on it. She held it carefully, her tiny hands cradling it, as though it were the most precious thing she'd ever seen. "What's this one, Mommy?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity. I froze for a moment, my eyes darting to him. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, but there was no tension in his shoulders, no fear in his gaze. Over the years, we'd spoken about Lina sparingly but openly, and while the subject still carried weight, it no longer felt like a secret between us. I knelt beside Emma, smoothing her hair back from her face. "That's a very special ornament," I told her. "It belonged to someone Daddy loved a long time ago. Someone who's part of the story of how we all ended up here together." She frowned slightly, her young mind working to piece together an explanation she could understand. "Like a friend." "Yes," I said softly. "Like a very dear friend." Satisfied with that answer, she carefully placed the ornament on a low branch, then clapped her hands, already moving on to the next shiny thing that caught her eye. I watched her for a moment, feeling the warmth of the moment settle over me. When I stood, he was there, his hand resting lightly on my back. "You didn't have to explain," he said quietly. "I wanted to," I replied, turning to look at him. "It's part of who we are. I don't want to hide it." He nodded, his eyes soft with gratitude and something deeper, something I recognized as love. We stood there for a moment, watching Emma as she babbled to herself, her hands busy rearranging the ornaments she could reach. The tree sparkled with lights, and at its heart was that glass bauble, catching the glow like a prism. Life didn't stop being complicated. There were more challenges to come: parenthood, careers, aging parents, and the inevitable moments of miscommunication that come with sharing a life with someone. But through it all, the ornament remained a quiet constant, a reminder of the things we'd overcome and the love we'd chosen to nurture. One year, Emma was old enough to ask more questions. "Who was she, really?" she asked one snowy afternoon as we decorated the tree together. By then she was a teenager, her curiosity sharper, her understanding deeper. She had heard bits and pieces over the years, fragments of a story that didn't quite fit together. "She was someone your dad loved very much," I said, choosing my words carefully. "She was part of his life before he met me. And even though she's not here anymore, she's still important in her own way." "Do you ever feel jealous?" she asked, her voice hesitant, as though she wasn't sure if the question was too personal. I paused, considering. "I did at first," I admitted. "But over time, I realized that loving someone doesn't take away from the love you have for someone else. It's not a competition. It's just part of being human. We carry the people we've loved with us, even after they're gone." She nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful as she placed the ornament on the tree. "I think that's kind of beautiful," she said after a moment. "It's like, she's part of our family in a way." I blinked back unexpected tears, struck by the wisdom in her words. "Yes," I said softly. "I think she is." As the years went by, the ornament became less about Lina and more about the journey we'd taken as a family. It was a symbol of resilience, of the complexities of love and memory, and of the choices we make to hold on to each other through everything. It hung on our tree every year, a simple piece of glass that told a story far bigger than itself. And every year as I looked at it, I felt a quiet peace, knowing that love, messy, imperfect, enduring, was the thread that wove it all together. As the years stretched onward, the ornament grew to feel less like a question and more like an answer, though to what exactly I couldn't always say. It wasn't just a relic of a life before me or a reminder of the woman who had once held his heart. It became something different entirely, something woven into the tapestry of our lives in a way that felt natural, even inevitable. It was no longer a symbol of comparison or insecurity. It was simply part of us. Emma went off to college, the house quieting in her absence in a way that left me and him with more time to reflect. We had built a good life together, filled with triumphs and struggles, love and the occasional pain that came with being human. There were times when we revisited Lina in quiet conversations, her name now spoken with a kind of reverence, not as a shadow but as an acknowledgement of the depth of his journey. One evening, long after the house had fallen silent, he and I sat on the couch with the soft hum of Christmas music in the background. The tree was lit, its ornaments glimmering in the warm glow. The years had brought new ones, Emma's handmade creations from school, trinkets we'd picked up on vacations, and gifts from friends and family. And there near the center was the ornament with Lina's name, its elegance timeless amid the colorful chaos of the rest. He reached for my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on my skin. "You know," he said after a long silence, "I used to think that keeping that ornament was a way of holding on to her. Like letting go of it would be letting go of her completely." I didn't respond immediately, letting his words hang in the air. The truth was I had always known that. I could see it in the way his eyes softened when he looked at it, in the way he had faltered the first time I'd found it. And though it had hurt back then, I had come to understand that holding on to someone's memory didn't mean letting go of the present. "And now?" I asked softly, squeezing his hand. He looked at me, his expression thoughtful, lined with the years we'd spent together. "Now I think it's different. It's not about holding on anymore. It's about honoring what was without letting it overshadow what is." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. There was no jealousy left, no lingering bitterness. What remained was the quiet gratitude that comes with knowing you've been chosen. Not because someone's past didn't matter, but because you mattered more in the end. "I think," I said after a moment, "that she would be glad. She'd want you to be happy." His eyes glistened, and he leaned over to kiss my temple, his lips warm against my skin. "I hope so," he murmured. "Because I am." That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the tree lights flickered softly, I let myself sink into the comfort of his arms. We didn't need to speak. The silence between us was no longer a space for questions or doubts. It was filled with the quiet understanding of two people who had weathered the storms and come out stronger for it. The years passed in a steady rhythm, marked by the cycles of the seasons and the ever-evolving shape of our family. Emma graduated, married, and eventually brought her own children to our home for the holidays. Watching her with them, I saw echoes of the little girl who had once toddled around the tree, her eyes wide with wonder. One Christmas, as our grandchildren helped decorate the tree, their giggles filling the room, one of them plucked Lina's ornament from the box. It had survived decades by then, its surface still smooth, and its inscription as clear as ever. "Who's Lina?" the youngest, a boy named Charlie, asked, his small voice cutting through the chatter. Emma turned to me with a knowing smile, her hand resting on her son's shoulder. "She was someone very special," she said simply, her words carrying the same gentle honesty I'd once used with her. "She's part of Grandpa's story and ours too." Charlie seemed satisfied with that answer, and he hung the ornament carefully on a low branch before scampering off to find another. I watched the scene unfold with a mixture of pride and contentment, my heart full as I saw how naturally our family had absorbed what once felt so heavy. When the room finally quieted that evening, he and I sat together by the fire, our hands intertwined as we admired the finished tree. It was fuller than ever, brimming with the stories of a life well lived. Each ornament a marker of a memory, a milestone, a moment. "Do you ever think about what she'd say if she could see us now?" I asked, my voice soft with the weight of the years. He smiled, his gaze distant but warm. "I think she'd say we did all right," he said. "More than all right." I rested my head on his shoulder, the steady beat of his heart a comforting rhythm beneath my cheek. In that moment, I felt the kind of peace that comes only after you've made your way through the hard things, the messy things, and come out on the other side stronger and more whole. The ornament still hung on our tree every year, its place as natural as any other. Not a reminder of what had been lost, but a testament to what had been found. A love that had weathered the storms of the past and grown into something enduring, something unshakable. And as I sat there, surrounded by the family we had built together, I knew that love, in all its forms, was the one thing that could truly stand the test of time. The years continued to flow like an unbroken river, carrying us forward with a quiet inevitability. The ornament, as much a part of our holiday tradition as the tree itself, remained steadfast in its place, a subtle but constant presence. Time had worn away the edges of the pain it once carried, leaving behind a gentler understanding, a tenderness that no longer stung. By the time we celebrated our 40th Christmas together, the house was alive with voices. Our grandchildren were older now, their energy boundless, their laughter ringing through the halls. They moved through the house with the kind of excitement only children seem to possess during the holidays, their joy infectious. Emma and her husband worked in the kitchen, the smell of roasted turkey wafting through the air, while he and I sat in the living room, watching the chaos unfold. I found myself gazing at the tree, at the way it had evolved over the decades. It was a living history of our family, its branches heavy with ornaments that each told a story. There was the star we'd bought for our first Christmas together, the ceramic angel Emma had made in kindergarten, the miniature lighthouse from a family vacation to Maine. And there, near the center, hung Lina's ornament, its elegance untouched by the passage of time. "Still holding up after all these years," he said softly, following my gaze. I nodded, a smile playing on my lips. "It's part of the family now." He chuckled, his hand reaching for mine. "You were the one who made that possible. I didn't think it could be back then." I looked at him, at the lines etched into his face, each one a testament to the life we had built together. His eyes still held the warmth and depth that had drawn me to him all those years ago. But now they carried something more: gratitude, wisdom, and an unshakable love that had only grown stronger with time. "It wasn't easy," I admitted, my voice quiet but firm. "But nothing worth keeping ever is." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only comes with a lifetime of shared experiences. The children's laughter echoed from another room, and I could hear Emma calling out instructions in her familiar, soothing tone. The house was full, not just of people, but of love, of memories, of everything we had worked so hard to create. As the evening wore on, the family gathered around the tree for the annual tradition of sharing stories behind the ornaments. It had started when Emma was a child, a way of connecting with the past while creating something new for the future. Each ornament was held up, its story told with care, and then placed back on the tree with reverence. When Lina's ornament was brought forward, it was Emma who held it. She turned it over in her hands, her expression thoughtful but calm. "This one," she began, her voice steady, "has always been a little different. It's not just about our family. It's about the people who came before us, the ones who shaped the people we love." The room fell quiet, the children watching with curiosity, the adults nodding in quiet agreement. Emma's words were simple, but they carried a weight that resonated deeply. She placed the ornament back on the tree, its reflection catching the soft glow of the lights, and turned to me with a smile. "It's part of who we are," she said, her words meant for me as much as for anyone else. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were the kind of tears that come when you realize just how much you've overcome, how much you've grown. I reached out to her, pulling her into a hug, and when I let go, I saw him watching us, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and the house had settled into a peaceful stillness, he and I found ourselves alone by the tree. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a soft, flickering light across the room. We stood side by side, looking at the tree, at the life it represented. "She would have liked this," he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of it. The noise, the love, the family." I nodded, my hand finding his. "She's part of it in her own way, and I think she knows that." He turned to me then, his expression open and vulnerable in a way that still had the power to take my breath away. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "For seeing me, for loving me, for understanding that love isn't a finite thing, that it grows, and it changes, and it makes room for everything we've been, and everything we hope to be." Tears slipped down my cheeks, and I didn't bother to wipe them away. "You don't need to thank me," I said, my voice breaking. "We've built this together, all of it, and I wouldn't trade a single moment." He pulled me into his arms then, holding me tightly, as though trying to convey with his embrace what words could never fully express. I closed my eyes, resting my head against his chest, and let myself sink into the warmth and safety of his love. The ornament stayed on our tree every year after that, its place as certain as any other. It became a quiet symbol, not just of what had been, but of what we had created together, a love that had withstood the weight of the past, that had grown and deepened through every challenge, that had found a way to include the complexities of life without being diminished by them. And when the time came, long after the house had once again grown quiet, we passed the ornament on to Emma. It was hers now, to carry forward, to remind her of where she came from, and to help her build her own traditions, her own story. And as we watched her place it on her tree for the first time, surrounded by her own family, I felt a peace so profound it seemed to settle into my very soul. Love, I realized, is not defined by what it excludes, but by what it makes room for. And in our lives, in our family, there was always room. As Emma took the ornament and hung it on her own family's tree, I saw the moment unfold as though it were part of some unbroken continuum. It felt almost poetic, the way life handed us pieces of its past, asking us to carry them forward, to reshape them in our own way. The ornament gleamed among the other decorations, and her children, our grandchildren, watched with curiosity, their young faces filled with wonder at this simple object that carried so much history. "Why is it so special, Mom?" one of them asked, a girl named Lily who had her mother's curious eyes. She tilted her head, trying to understand the weight of something that seemed so ordinary on the surface. Emma knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "It's special because it's been with us for a very long time," she explained. "It reminds us of the people we love, and the stories that helped shape our family." Lily considered this for a moment, then nodded as though it all made sense. "So it's like a memory?" she asked. "Yes," Emma said, her voice warm. "A memory that we keep alive every year." Watching her explain it, I felt a sense of pride that was almost overwhelming. She had grown into such a remarkable woman, filled with compassion and strength, and it was clear that she understood the deeper truths of life in a way that took me years to learn. The ornament had been a small part of that journey, a silent witness to the growth of our family, the evolution of our love. As the years continued, the ornament became something of a legend in our family, a story that grew with each telling. It was no longer just about Lina or the part she played in shaping my husband's life. It became a symbol of resilience, of the way love adapts and endures. Emma's children began to refer to it as the heart ornament, a name that suited it perfectly. For them it wasn't tied to loss or heartache. It was simply a cherished piece of their family's history, as ordinary and extraordinary as any other part of their lives. When Emma's eldest, Sam, was old enough to start his own family, the ornament passed to him. By then it was decades old, its once pristine surface bearing tiny scratches that spoke of its long journey. Sam held it with reverence, his expression thoughtful as Emma explained its significance to him. "It's not just about where it came from," she told him, her voice steady and sure. "It's about what it represents. Love isn't always easy, and sometimes it comes with a history that's complicated. But it's worth holding on to, even when it's messy." Sam nodded, his gaze lingering on the ornament. "I'll take good care of it," he promised, his voice filled with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the weight of responsibility. And so the ornament found its way onto yet another tree, its legacy carried forward by a new generation. It became a part of their holiday traditions, a story told to curious children who saw it as something magical, almost mythical. Each year it found its place among the lights and garlands, its inscription barely legible now but no less meaningful. As for me and him, our lives slowed in those later years. The house grew quieter, the days longer, but there was a peacefulness to it that I hadn't anticipated. We spent our time tending to the garden, reading books by the fire, and reminiscing about the life we'd built together. There were moments of sorrow, of course, the losses that come with age, the goodbyes that never get easier, but there was also a deep and abiding gratitude for everything we'd shared. One Christmas, long after the ornament had left our home, we sat together by the fire, the room filled with the soft glow of the lights. Our own tree was smaller now, decorated simply but lovingly, a reflection of the quieter pace of our lives. "Do you miss it?" he asked suddenly, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. I looked at him, surprised. "Miss what?" "The ornament," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's strange not seeing it on our tree." I thought about it for a moment, letting his words settle. "No," I said finally, my voice gentle. "Because it's where it belongs now. It's part of their story, just like it was part of ours." He nodded, his smile growing. "You always had a way of seeing the bigger picture," he said. "I don't know how I got so lucky." I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his. "We were both lucky," I said simply. "And we still are." The fire crackled softly, the warmth of it wrapping around us like a blanket. We sat there for a long time, content in the knowledge that the life we'd built together, with all its imperfections and triumphs, was more than we could have ever hoped for. When he passed a few years later, I found myself reflecting on the ornament once more. It had been such a small thing, and yet it had shaped so much of our journey. It had taught me about forgiveness, about resilience, about the way love stretches and grows to accommodate the complexities of life. It had shown me that love isn't diminished by the past but enriched by it, that every memory, every connection, adds another layer to the story we share. In the quiet months that followed, I visited Emma often, finding comfort in the laughter and energy of her home. One Christmas, as we gathered around their tree, I saw the ornament hanging there, its place secure among the decorations. It sparkled softly in the light, a testament to the passage of time and the enduring nature of love. And as I watched my great-grandchildren add their own ornaments to the tree, I realized that the ornament's journey was far from over. It would continue, passed from hand to hand, its story growing with each new generation. It wasn't just a symbol of what had been. It was a reminder of everything that still lay ahead, of the infinite ways love could transform and endure. It was, and always would be, part of the heart of our family. Years turned into decades, and the ornament's story became more than just a cherished family tale. It grew into a tradition that transcended generations. By the time I was well into my 90s, I had watched as it passed through the hands of Emma's children, then to their children. Each new family member who inherited it seemed to recognize its significance immediately, treating it with the same quiet reverence we all had, though the exact details of its origin had blurred over time. Now, in the twilight of my life, I found myself reflecting more often, my mind wandering back to those early years when I first discovered it. The sting of those initial moments felt like a distant memory, softened by the countless joys and lessons that had followed. The ornament had been a turning point in my marriage, a challenge that forced us to confront the complexities of love and loss, and in doing so it had strengthened the bond we shared. As I sat in my favorite chair by the window one frosty December morning, I gazed out at the snow-covered world. The air was crisp and still, the kind of morning that made everything seem hushed, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Emma arrived not long after, her arms filled with holiday cheer. A warm scarf she'd knitted, a tin of cookies, and her ever-bright smile. "Mom, you'll never believe it," she said as she set her things down and began helping me with my shawl. "Lily found the ornament again, and she's insisting on keeping it up all year. She says it's her favorite." I smiled at the thought. Lily, now a young woman in her 20s, had always been the one most curious about the ornament, asking questions about its story whenever we gathered around the tree. I could see her now in my mind's eye, her hands cupping the delicate glass as though it were something sacred. "Good," I said, my voice soft but steady. "It should be loved, not hidden away." Emma nodded, her eyes misty as she knelt by my chair. "I've been thinking about it a lot lately," she admitted. "How something so small could carry so much meaning for all of us. It's like it connects us to something bigger." I reached out, placing a hand on hers. "That's because it does," I said. "It's not just about the ornament, Emma. It's about the story, the people, the love. That's what's bigger. That's what lasts." Tears welled in her eyes, and she gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "You've always known how to make things make sense," she said, her voice breaking slightly. The rest of the day passed in a haze of warmth and laughter as Emma decorated the house for me, her movements purposeful and familiar. She placed a smaller tree in the corner of the room, adorned with only a few ornaments, simple ones each chosen with care. As she worked, I found myself drifting into a light sleep, lulled by the soft hum of her voice and the faint scent of pine. When I woke, the room was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Emma sat nearby, a book in her hands, but she looked up and smiled when she saw me stirring. "Do you want to see the tree?" she asked. I nodded, and she helped me to my feet, guiding me to the small but beautiful tree she decorated. It wasn't grand or elaborate, but it was perfect, each ornament reflecting a part of our story. My eyes landed on one in particular, a small replica of the original ornament, crafted years ago by one of the grandchildren when the glass one became too fragile to be handled frequently. "You made sure it stayed with us," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Emma smiled. It's part of who we are. How could I not? We stood there together for a long moment, the quiet of the room wrapping around us like a blanket. My heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the ornament, but for everything it had come to represent. It was a symbol of love, not just between two people, but of the way love expands, touching everyone it encounters, growing and changing yet never diminishing. In the weeks that followed, my health began to decline. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, but I felt at peace. I had lived a full life, one filled with love and laughter, with challenges that had shaped me and triumphs that had lifted me. And through it all, the ornament had been there, a quiet witness to the passage of time. One evening, as I lay in bed with Emma by my side, I found myself thinking once more of Lina, of the way her memory had been woven into the fabric of our family. I wondered what she would think if she could see all of this, the love that had endured, the family that had grown, the legacy that would carry on long after I was gone. She'd be proud, I murmured, my voice barely audible. Emma leaned closer. Who, Mom? Lina, I said, my eyes drifting closed. She'd be proud of what we've built, of how we've kept her memory alive. Emma didn't respond immediately, but I felt her hand tighten around mine. She'd be proud of you too, she said softly. For everything. I smiled, the weight of her words settling over me like a final gift. In that moment I knew that the ornament, and everything it represented, would continue to shine long after I was gone. It would remain a beacon of love and resilience, a testament to the power of memory and connection. And as I drifted into a peaceful sleep, I carried with me the knowledge that our story, like the ornament itself, would endure. The world seemed to fade into a soft, comforting blur in those final days. My family surrounded me, their voices a gentle hum of love and care. The house, always full of life, was quieter now, but not in a way that felt lonely. It was the quiet of a story drawing to its close, the pages turning slowly, each moment cherished for what it was. The little tree Emma had decorated stood in the corner, its lights twinkling softly as if to remind me that light persists, even in the stillness. On Christmas Eve, Emma sat by my bedside, holding my hand as the rest of the family gathered downstairs. Their laughter echoed faintly, a reminder of the life that continued to flourish around me. She had brought a small box with her, the same one that had once held the original ornament all those years ago. Inside was a photo album, its cover worn from use. I thought we could go through this together, she said softly, opening the album to the first page. The photographs were a mosaic of memories, each one a glimpse into a life well lived. There was a picture of Emma as a child, her face smeared with chocolate, standing proudly in front of a lopsided gingerbread house. Another of her first dance recital, her arms stretched out in an awkward pose but her smile radiant. Then came the photos of her own family, her wedding day, her husband's warm smile matching hers, the births of her children, their milestones captured in frozen moments of joy. And there, tucked between the pages, was a photograph I hadn't seen in years, the ornament hanging on our tree during its first Christmas with us. The words inscribed on its glass were clear, the name Lina glowing faintly in the light of the tree. I reached out, tracing the edges of the photo with trembling fingers. It always finds its way back, doesn't it? I said, my voice weak but steady. Emma nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It does. It's part of all of us now. As we turned the pages, the years seemed to fold in on themselves, the weight of time replaced by the lightness of memory. I saw his face again, younger, filled with the energy and hope of a man who had once carried so much pain but had learned to let love fill the spaces left behind. I saw the family we had built together, the milestones we had celebrated, and the quiet moments that had shaped us. When we reached the end of the album, Emma closed it gently and placed it on the bedside table. The light from the tree reflected in her eyes as she leaned closer. Mom, she said, her voice breaking slightly, I want you to know that we'll keep it going. The stories, the traditions, all of it. We'll make sure it stays alive. I smiled, the corners of my lips barely lifting, but the warmth in my chest was unmistakable. I know you will, I whispered. You've always understood. That night, as the house settled into a peaceful hush, I drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. When I woke, it was Christmas morning. The light streaming through the window was soft and golden, the world outside blanketed in fresh snow. Emma came to my room, her smile gentle as she helped me sit up, "Merry Christmas, Mom," she said, placing a kiss on my forehead. The family gathered around my bed that morning, their faces bright with love. They brought me small gifts, tokens of their affection. But it was their presence that mattered most. As the children opened their presents and the room filled with laughter, I felt a profound sense of peace. The ornament, now hanging on Emma's tree, seemed to watch over us all, its presence a quiet reminder of everything we had shared. In the weeks that followed, I found myself growing weaker, the days blurring together in a haze of warmth and care. Emma was by my side every step of the way, her strength and grace a testament to the lessons we had learned together. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, she held my hand and told me a story. "Do you remember the first time I asked about the ornament?" she began, her voice soft and melodic. "I didn't understand why it was so important back then. But now I do. It wasn't just about Lina or about you and Dad. It was about everything, about how love carries us through, even when it's hard." I nodded, my eyes closing as her words washed over me. "It's always been about love," I murmured. "That's all that matters." When I finally slipped away, it was in the comfort of that love, surrounded by the family we had built, the legacy we had created together. Emma kept her promise, ensuring that the stories and traditions lived on. The ornament became a touchstone for generations, a symbol of resilience, connection, and the enduring power of love. Long after I was gone, the ornament continued its journey, passed from hand to hand, its story growing richer with each new chapter. It became more than a piece of glass. It became a beacon, a reminder that love, no matter how complicated, no matter how messy, is always worth holding on to. Years stretched into centuries as the ornament passed through the branches of family trees that grew and intertwined, its legacy expanding with each new set of hands that held it. By the time it had reached my great-great-grandchildren, it had become more than a simple holiday decoration. It was an heirloom, a relic of a family's journey through love, loss, resilience, and renewal. The ornament's glass surface, once pristine and reflective, was now softened with time, its faint scratches and chips testament to the countless moments it had witnessed. The words inscribed on it, "You're always in my heart, Lina," were now barely legible, their meaning known not by sight but by the stories passed down. Those stories had been told around countless fires, under countless trees, through countless Christmas mornings, the ornament always at the center, like a quiet guardian of a shared history. By the time the ornament reached the hands of Lily's granddaughter, a young woman named Clara, it had become a revered piece of their family's history. Clara had grown up hearing the stories of the ornament, though its origins felt like something out of a fairy tale to her. She'd heard about Lina, about my husband, about me, and about how the ornament had sparked the beginning of a family tradition that carried on long after the original characters had left this world. As Clara carefully unwrapped the ornament one Christmas Eve, she held it in her hands with the same care she might give a fragile treasure. The glass, though worn, still caught the light in a way that made it seem as though it were glowing from within. She turned it over, tracing the faded inscription with her fingertip, feeling the faint ridges of the letters that had been etched so long ago. "Tell me the story again," Clara said, looking at her father, who sat nearby with a cup of tea in hand. Her father smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with warmth. "It's been told so many times, I'm not sure what's true anymore," he teased gently. But when Clara's curious gaze didn't waver, he leaned forward and began. "Your great-great-grandmother found this ornament while decorating a tree with her husband. She didn't know who Lina was, and it led to a lot of questions about love, about the past, about trust. It wasn't easy for her to accept that her husband had loved someone before her. But in time, she realized that love doesn't erase what came before. Instead, it grows, making room for everything and everyone." Clara listened intently, her eyes fixed on the ornament. "And that's why we keep it?" she asked. Her father nodded. "It's a reminder, not just of the people who came before us, but of the lessons they learned. Love isn't perfect, Clara. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it hurts. But it's also what binds us together. It's what makes us who we are." Clara turned the ornament over again, watching as the tree lights danced across its surface. For a moment, She could almost imagine the lives of those who had held it before her. The laughter, the tears, the quiet moments of reflection. She could see her great-great-grandmother standing by the fire, her heart full of questions and fears, and she could see her finding peace in the love that had carried her through. That night, Clara placed the ornament on the tree with reverence, choosing a spot near the top where it could catch the light. As her family gathered around to sing carols and exchange gifts, she found herself glancing at it again and again, feeling a connection to something far greater than herself. The years continued to pass, and the ornament remained a steadfast presence. It survived wars, moves, and the ever-changing tides of life. It hung on trees in tiny cottages, sprawling suburban homes, and sleek city apartments, always finding its way back to the heart of the family. Each generation added its own chapter to the story, weaving new traditions and lessons into the fabric of what had begun so many years ago. One day, far in the future, the ornament came into the possession of a descendant who worked as a historian. Intrigued by its origins, she set out to piece together the true story of its journey, combing through old letters, photographs, and journals. What she discovered was a tale that spanned lifetimes, a story of love that endured not because it was simple, but because it was strong enough to embrace complexity. She wrote a book about the ornament, chronicling its journey through the generations. The book became a bestseller, capturing the hearts of readers who saw themselves in its pages. People marveled at the idea that something so small, a fragile piece of glass, could carry so much meaning. For the family, it was a moment of pride, a chance to share their story with the world. Even as the ornament became famous, it remained at the center of the family's traditions. They continued to hang it on their tree each year, to tell its story to wide-eyed children, to pass it from hand to hand with the same care and love that had sustained it for centuries. It became a symbol not just of their family, but of something universal, the idea that love in all its forms is what gives life its meaning. And so the ornament endured, its light never dimming, its story never ending. It hung on trees in worlds far beyond the one it had first known. Its journey a testament to the power of memory, connection, and the enduring strength of the human heart. As time stretched ever onward, the ornament's legacy expanded beyond what anyone in the family could have anticipated. What had begun as a small personal story tied to love and loss transformed into a beacon of connection, a reminder of the enduring strength of relationships through the generations. The ornament, now weathered but still intact, was no longer just a decoration. It was a thread that wove together lifetimes, a physical embodiment of the idea that love could outlast even the fragility of human existence. Generations passed, and the family grew, branching out into far corners of the world. Each time the ornament changed hands, it carried with it not just its own story, but the accumulated tales of the people who had cared for it. Names and faces blurred with the passage of time, but the essence of the story remained constant, spoken in hushed voices around trees adorned with lights, in homes that changed with the eras but never lost their warmth. One year it came to rest with a family living in a bustling city. The world had changed dramatically by then, with technology connecting people in ways that the ornament's earliest caretakers could never have imagined. Yet, even in this fast-paced world, the tradition of the ornament remained sacred. It was hung with care by a woman named Elise, who had inherited it from her grandmother, a descendant of Clara. Elise was a writer, and like the historian before her, she felt drawn to the ornament's story. She began documenting its journey, piecing together fragments of its history through letters, photographs, and oral accounts passed down through the family. Her work became an obsession, and she poured herself into capturing not just the details of its journey, but the emotions it had carried through the years. The more she delved into its history, the more she realized that the ornament was more than just a family heirloom. It was a symbol of something universal, a testament to the resilience of love, and the way it could bridge time and distance. Inspired, Elise decided to write a novel based on the ornament's story, blending fact and fiction to create a sweeping tale that spanned centuries. The book, titled Always in My Heart, became a sensation, touching readers around the world. People were moved by the idea that an ordinary object could hold such extraordinary meaning, that something as simple as a glass ornament could connect generations and remind people of what truly mattered. The book was adapted into a film, its release sparking a wave of interest in family traditions and heirlooms. For the family, The sudden fame of the ornament was both exhilarating and surreal. It had always been their private treasure, a quiet piece of their history, and now it was something much larger. Yet, even as the world embraced its story, the family held tight to the tradition of hanging it on their tree each year. For them, it wasn't about the fame or the recognition, it was about the love and the lessons that the ornament symbolized. Elisa's book inspired others to share their own stories, and soon, people began writing to her about their own family heirlooms and the traditions that defined their lives. She found herself at the center of a global conversation about memory, connection, and the importance of cherishing the past while building the future. Through it all, the ornament remained at the heart of her work, a constant reminder of the power of love. As the years turned into centuries, the ornament's journey continued. It passed through countless hands, each new caretaker adding their own chapter to its story. The world changed around it. Cities rose and fell. Technology advanced in ways that seemed almost magical, and humanity reached for the stars. Yet, through all these changes, the ornament remained a steadfast presence, a quiet witness to the unchanging nature of love and family. One Christmas, long after Elisa's time, the ornament hung on a tree in a home built on a distant planet. Humanity had expanded beyond Earth, and with it, so had the family. The tree was artificial, its branches made of a material that mimicked the look and feel of pine, and the lights that adorned it glowed softly in the low gravity of the domed habitat. A young girl named Mira held the ornament in her hands, her eyes wide with wonder as her parents told her its story. Though she lived in a world far removed from the one where the ornament's journey had begun, she felt the weight of its history, the connection to the countless lives it had touched. She hung it on the tree with care, her reflection shimmering in its surface as she whispered, "Always in my heart." For Mira, the ornament was a link to a past she could only imagine, a reminder that even in the vastness of space, love remained a constant. It was a part of her family, a part of her identity, and she knew that one day, it would be her turn to tell its story to the next generation. And so, the ornament continued its journey, defying the limits of time and space. It became a symbol not just of one family's history, but of the enduring power of love to connect, to heal, and to inspire. No matter where it went, no matter how the world changed, it carried with it the unshakable truth that love is eternal, a light that never fades, a story that never ends. As the ornament's journey reached its final chapters, it found itself nestled once again in the hands of a young caretaker. Mira, now an old woman herself, sat by the tree with her grandchildren, the artificial branches glowing softly in the low light of their distant home. The ornament was older than anyone alive, its glass weathered but still intact, its story told so many times it had become a legend within the family. That year, Mira decided it was time to write the ornament's final inscription. The words, "Always in my heart, Lina," had faded to near invisibility over the centuries, but she didn't want to erase them. Instead, she added a new inscription on the opposite side, engraving the words with the delicate tools available in their advanced age. "Love endures." As her grandchildren watched, Mira explained the meaning of the new words. She told them about the lives the ornament had touched, the lessons it had carried through generations, and how it had become a symbol of resilience and connection. She spoke not just of Lina, but of me and my husband, of Emma and Clara, of Elise and all those who had added their voices to the ornament's journey. "Love doesn't fade," she said softly, her voice trembling with age but steady with conviction. "It changes, it grows, it moves forward, but it never truly leaves. This ornament is proof of that." Her grandchildren listened with wide eyes, their young minds trying to grasp the enormity of the history they were inheriting. When she finished, they helped her place the ornament on the highest branch of the tree, its light catching the new inscription and reflecting it into the room. For a moment, it seemed as though the entire space glowed, the ornament radiating the love it had carried for so long. That was the last Christmas Mira spent with her family. When she passed away the following spring, her grandchildren carefully preserved the ornament, honoring her wishes to continue the tradition. But they knew, even as they held it, that its story was finally complete. The ornament had done its work, connecting generations, carrying love and lessons across centuries, and leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had touched it. That Christmas, the family gathered once more, this time to celebrate not just the holiday, but the life of the woman who had carried their legacy forward. They hung the ornament in its place of honor, now bearing both the original inscription and the words Mira had added. And as they stood together, gazing at the tree, they felt not sadness but gratitude, a deep, abiding sense of connection to those who had come before and those who would come after. In time, the ornament was retired, placed in a special case that preserved it for future generations to see and remember. Its story, once whispered around trees and fireplaces, was now told through books and recordings, its legacy woven into the fabric of the family's identity. And though it no longer hung on the branches of a tree, its spirit endured in every act of love, every moment of connection, every tradition passed down from one generation to the next. Because love, as the ornament had always reminded them, endures. It transcends time, space, and even memory, finding new ways to shine in the hearts of those who choose to carry it forward. And so, the ornament's story came to its quiet, fitting end, not as an object forgotten, but as a symbol cherished, its meaning alive in the lives it had touched and the love it had inspired. It had fulfilled its purpose, and in doing so, it had become eternal.